welcome. Yes, my name is Arafat and welcome back to another episode of My Top 5. And can you believe it? This year marks 20 years of Transformers Armada. I mean, Christ, does that make you feel old for a start? The Armada show pretty much fell out of Beast Wars, and the kind of regeneration and breathing a bit of life into Transformers going into the 2000s. We had RID around the same time as well. This kick-started a new trilogy, and really to start trilogies altogether, this was going into what Hasbro had as a 3-series plan, part of the Unicron Trilogy. This was to bring in new characters, reusing some names, bring in some new human characters, and a slightly different direction, albeit Autobots against Decepticons. So of course, taking this opportunity, I'm going to give you my top 5 Transformers Armada characters. Now of course, this is just for the Armada series, not the Unicron Trilogy as a whole. We'll do the rest of them another day. So let's power link, or whatever it was they did. No, it's Minicons, wasn't it?
Top 5.
Number 5, Demolisher. Now, Demolisher ultimately went on to become a little bit of a joke character in this series, but when the first few episodes started, he was a bit of a credible threat. He was a bit of a sergeant, and he was a tank, so a military persona kind of suited him. But then you got this different looking character who seemed quite credible, did remind me a bit of one of the grunts from He-Man, Masters of the Universe. Never quite smart enough to lead an army themselves, but still enough to be a good character in their own right and have enough depth to be interesting. Most of the series he was spent bartering with the likes of Cyclonus or later Snowcat, and he did become a bit of a joke character. But for his first few scenes, he did look quite interesting. His alt mode looked very kind of menacing in its way. It looked a little bit new, and the design was quite welcome. It's a shame that it took a matter of 3 or 4 episodes for this character to go from being fairly serious to being almost a bit forgettable. Number 4, Optimus Prime. Now, okay, yes, he's going to make the top 5 on most lists, but this was a bit different in that this was the first time we had seen a really reimagined look on Optimus. Now, yes, he was still red and he was still blue, and it didn't really change the fact that he was still a truck, but the design was fairly different to what we had from Generation 1, Generation 2, even Power Master, and okay, RID did their own thing anyway, but this was a bit of a change. Not only that, this was Gary Chalk who voiced Optimus Prime with Beast Wars, of course, reprising his role, or if you like, taking on this role of Optimus Prime for the first time. This made for a slightly different take on the character, a very primal-esque Prime. He was quite noble, almost quick-witted, more so than say a Generation 1 Prime was, voiced by the great Peter Cullen. But this was a good look for Optimus anyway. I actually quite like his cab-only mode. He was quite smaller in stature, but still very much the big leader that he always was. Not to mention when he became fully combined with his trailer and he turned into this Super Optimus Prime convoy mode, I believe it was called. This was, again, a bit of a different look. If you look at that design, no Optimus has really looked like that before or since. It's a very Japanese inspired, manga inspired of course, but this was a interesting new direction for Optimus to go in. The fact it didn't really resemble Optimus of the past, yet it still is quite a famous design that you do see come up from time to time. It was certainly welcome to me. Number 3, Tidal Wave. Talk about making a splash of an entrance. Yes, this really was a bit of a change and a much needed change in the series. The Decepticons seemingly were quite undervalued, already underhanded throughout. They didn't have enough foot soldiers. So how do you solve that? You give them the biggest thing on the planet. And this massive aircraft carrier, flying aircraft carrier at times, would become this massive, dull, incredibly dim-witted machine. But my God, was he a threat. And he really did give the kind of the same warlike presence that a Devastator did in Generation 1. This really actually comes into play that a lot of people would know in the PlayStation 2 game Transformers Armada, which is a very good game in its own right, but one thing that I very much remember, and a lot of people do too, is the boss fight sort of around mid-level of the game where you fight Tidal Wave on your own. That's a very heavy mission. It's a very good fun fight, but first time I played that I thought, how the hell am I going to beat this guy? And that really came across throughout the series. It is a shame that a lot of fans have been crying out to see more of Tidal Wave. He's a big character, surprisingly dim-witted, yet has still got a lot to offer. Number 2, Megatron. Now yes, this Megatron is one of my favourite Megatrons. David Kane taking up the role of this for the first time, being a Decepticon Megatron, and I love the design of this mode. Actually, fans told me I've got a new toy of this coming out, which I'm very much looking forward to having in my collection very soon. But this was really the first time we saw Megatron as a tank. Okay, yes, Generation 2, I know, but this was first time going into kind of multimedia that we saw him not as a gun. And this was quite welcome in that he was a massive tank. Not again that Generation 2 was as well, but this felt quite a step up. His robot mode couldn't have looked any more different than, say, Generation 1. There was no grey in this design whatsoever. And the fact that, again, he towered over Optimus in just his cab mode, to the point that Optimus needed to combine with his trailer just to go toe-to-toe with Megatron. This is how you create a supervillain, and how you create a very detailed, charismatic leader that only David Kane can reprise to his role, at least I think so. I love seeing this character, and it's a shame the design altered into the latter series of the Unicron Trilogy. I felt this was one of the best designs of Megatron that we've ever seen. And number 1, Starscream. Yes, quite predictably I suppose you could say when you got this far on the list and you hadn't heard his name. Now this Starscream was again nothing new than what we hadn't seen before. He was still conniving, still wanted to overthrow the Decepticons, but there were some twists throughout. So when Starscream gets his Minicon upgrade, he does become quite powerful. And you see kind of throughout the series that there is a bit more depth to this character, even to the stage that he has a crisis of conscience, and how he nearly joins the Autobots. This is the first time we've ever really seen this. And I've said this before, when you get these very rare moments throughout all the Transformers history that Starscream almost turns good, it's so few and far between. It's so special when it happens. It's very rare that it does. But this was probably the closest he's really ever come to it. He might have turned on a bot for about an episode before going back to his roots. It was really interesting, and I love this design. Again, it's quite brave, is it not, to alter the design of a beloved character like an Optimus, like a Megatron, like a Starscream. Starscream probably went through one of the bigger changes similar to Megatron. There wasn't a lot of resemblance to the Generation 1 character. Yes, it's still wings out to the side, cockpit through the middle, but the colour scheme was quite different, and it was a very striking pose to the fact that when the IDW comics picked it up for a few episodes and a few editions, this would be Starscream's body for a time. It's a great homage to a very great design, and how you can redefine a character and still keep the characteristic traits. It just shows you that you've got a very good base model to work with, but a very good character at the end of it. Overall, Armada was a very great show, and it did come out at a very good time for Transformers. Following the demise of Beast Wars, I guess you'd say, it needed something to carry it through, and the films were a little bit far away for anything to really happen. This was a good gap for Hasbro to fill in. Armada was a good reset, and the Minicons were fairly forgettable in their way. Yes, they powered up the Transformers, but the fact that they were this race of micro machine cars that would make these super robots even more powerful seemed a little bit far-fetched in its way. But hey, there has to be a plot, there has to be a storyline. This was it for this one. But anyway, let's raise a glass to 20 years of Transformers Armada. I'm sure it isn't the last we've seen of them. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and hit that subscribe button, because I will see you on the next one.